Hi guys, wanted to come on here and briefly talk about a movie I just finished watching from a little Sonny Chiba collection here. Another one of those Mill Creek releases. I have a lot of these and I really like them. Sometimes they have some really interesting stuff that's hard to find in other forms. I'll end up with so many Mill Creek collections eventually. But I've had this in my collection for quite a while, a couple of years, and out of the four films, I'd watched three out of the four. The fourth one was didn't not watch for any particular reason, just hadn't really gotten around to it. Finally got around to watching that today, and the two English titles for it are GI Samurai and Time Slip. And this is actually pretty interesting. On the back it sounded like, okay, kind of generic, but it ended up being pretty interesting and creative. It is about a troop of Japanese soldiers sent back in time from the Showa period to the Warring States period, 400 years in the past, and surviving, trying to find their way through this time period. Sonny Chiba obviously doesn't disappoint here. He rarely does. Pretty much anything I've seen of his, he's great in some form or another. But there's also some equally strong performances from the cast, both in the Japanese troops from the Showa time period, our time period, 1979, this movie came out, and also from the Warring States period. You have a really interesting dynamic. It's one where there's a huge cast of side characters and primary characters, and everyone's given a little bit of time, enough of a role to where you don't feel that it's too much of a singular focus on Sonny Chiba's character or one or two characters, or some more people that are in the forefront, obviously, and are given a lot more time and characterization, but there's enough of a show of everyone around that you get the feeling of not just the time period, but all the different characters having an important role to play, even if it's a very minor role. And it has some really interesting, unique relationships. I was definitely expecting, of course, the romance, falling in love with a woman from the time period, and we do get some of that, but there's also a really interesting bromance, friendship that forms with Sonny Chiba's character, another very important character from that time period, as he tries to find his way and comes up with this theory very early on in the movie, and you'll see without me spoiling anything how this really comes to develop, that if they were kind of to throw the timeline off and try and conquer Japan, that it would send them back in time because it would mess up, back forward in time because it would mess up the timeline so much, and all these different aspects come around, and you do have a group of troops under his command who go AWOL, and you have very dramatic, interesting moments there, and it goes on a lot longer than I thought. I wasn't really paying attention to how long I was watching the movie. There's a couple interesting story arcs, like mini little arcs through this that are resolved, and you move along through the greater story, and it works fairly well. There's a nice flow to it. It's very interesting. Again, a lot of really great dynamic relationships and different relationships, and some that were a little unexpected, and it has a very good action feel. It's somewhat comedic in parts, very dramatic in other parts. It has a very good balance. It doesn't drag out, and it never feels too campy and goofy. That was another worry I had going in with this type of storyline, where you just read about people from the late 70s, these soldiers going back to the past and shooting samurais with their machine guns and that kind of stuff. But it never really got to that campy feeling I was expecting. It actually turned out to be a pretty decent, fun, interesting movie. Visually, it was done very well. The special effects were done very well. A lot of the cinematography fit really well into the action set pieces. Is something, again, that I thought was going to feel a little bit goofy, but it felt very seriously done. I definitely feel like it wasn't made with a sense of camp at all, which was very surprising. And it really has some very exciting and interesting and bloody battle scenes and things that are done really well, and with large numbers of extras in some scenes. So again, it was a very surprising movie, because sometimes from these collections, especially when you get to either martial arts movies or East Asian movies from 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of times these collections come up with some of the more goofy crap out there, and I was expecting a little bit better because of who the collection is, but again, this was very surprising in all those respects. One area that I thought was not quite as good as I wanted it to be was in the soundtrack. The music is very 70s to a fault. I think it feels just very 70s, and kind of takes this away from being something that's it doesn't have a timeless appeal to it. It feels very much made when it was made, and occasionally the songs don't quite fit the scene. I really feel like certain pieces should have had a little more of a serious quality, a little more of a timeless quality to some scenes of the music when you're having these soldiers from the late 70s, 400 years in the past, and interacting in a dramatic scene. A song that feels very, very 70s playing in the background just doesn't always work very well. And there are a couple of instances where the soundtrack kind of clashes with the feel and the mood of what's going on. There's a section where the group that goes AWOL basically starts to rape and pillage, and as you are watching them rape these village women they've captured, the song that's playing in the background has almost a, I want to say almost a slapsticky kind of like goofy quality to it. Like, it doesn't feel as almost hard. You want to feel this almost like horrifying sound in the background. You want to really feel the terror of the scene, and really feel for why then they need to go against this portion of their troops that went back in time, why you need to go to stop these guys who have gone AWOL and they're doing terrible things. And it doesn't feel that way. It really kind of takes you out. It's very awkward to have that kind of music playing in that type of scene. There are a couple moments throughout the picture that are like that. It's something that definitely could have been improved, but other than that, yeah, story-wise, it was very, very good. Again, I said the action sequences were great. Cinematography, the whole thing looked very good. It looked things looked of the time period that they were supposed to be from, and things didn't. They meshed in a very interesting way. I really love the one scene of them riding along at all the samurai on horseback, and they're riding along right next to them, kind of amongst them in the Jeep, and it looks kind of cool. There's a couple images like that work really well. A lot of good performances, but again, the soundtrack's kind of and there were a few little story pieces that didn't quite work, how they never ran out of ammunition or fuel for the vehicles or anything. Like, that wasn't addressed really much at all throughout the whole thing, and felt a little ridiculous. However, I did read, because it's the first time I had seen this movie, I hadn't really heard about it. Apparently there was a remake in 2005, 2006, I think I said, which apparently goes into a little more detail and adds those kind of things, fixes a lot, and it is based on a book. I've never obviously read the book, just saw this movie for the first time, so I don't know how much better or more in-depth the book is. I'm actually kind of curious now. This was entertaining enough and surprisingly good enough that I really want to go see the remake and read the book sometime. I'm actually pretty fascinated. It sounded like a very kind of goofy sci-fi time travel story that turned into a pretty interesting feature, so that was really, really good here. This is a good collection. If you are like me and you like these Mill Creek collections, if you don't, go check them out. A lot of them, again, are the equivalent of kind of like shovelware crap collections of tons of terrible movies or defunct, forgotten TV shows, but they do have a lot of really good collections in there. If you search, really look through the Mill Creek collections and research different volumes. Some are really good. I definitely suggest something like this is really good here. Stay away from there's a couple of different martial arts ones that aren't that great. This one's really good. They did have a lot of releases of things like Bewitched and a lot of shows from that time period, and really nice collections. And definitely the Decade collections, those are my favorites so far that I've seen. Those are really cool. They have like Fabulous 40s, Nifty 50s, like Sensational 60s, something like that, but they have different collections like those and different comedy movies and stuff, and they can include some really good stuff that it can be a little difficult to find in individual releases on other formats like Laserdisc or DVD, so they can be really interesting collections. Check them out, and this is a really good one. Again, that's just one of the 4 movies on here. Maybe I'll come back and talk about the other 3 sometime in a video, but I just want to talk about this one briefly because it was one of the 4 that I hadn't watched yet, and it was surprisingly good. It was definitely a movie that surprised me. It wasn't the campy, goofy thing I thought it was going to be. It was actually pretty fun and fairly well done, and now I'm going to see if the remake ever came out over here, or I'll have to get the Japanese DVD, who knows, and see if the book was translated, because that would be pretty awesome. It was not a bad movie. Again, the English titles for this movie, the ones that are going to be easiest to find, obviously, are GI Samurai or Time Slip with Sonny Chiba.